The scent of smoke still clung to Clara Bennett's hair 3 days after the barn burned to ash, and the accusing stares of the townsfolk felt like hot brands against her skin every time she walked through Redemption Springs, Texas. It was the summer of 1882, and the drought had turned the land brittle as old bones, making every spark a potential catastrophe, making every finger point toward someone to blame, and that someone was her. Clara stood on the dusty Main Street outside the general store, her calico dress faded from too many washings, her hands gripping her empty basket so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had come to town for supplies, but the whispers followed her like shadows. Mrs. Henderson crossed the street rather than walk past her. Old Pete Morrison spat tobacco juice near her feet, close enough to make his feelings clear. The barn had belonged to the Carmichael ranch, the largest spread in 3 counties, and when it burned with half the winter hay inside and 2 prize horses barely escaping with their lives, someone had to answer for it. That someone was Clara, because she had been the last person seen near the barn that afternoon, carrying a lantern in broad daylight, which made no sense to her since she remembered no such thing. But 3 witnesses swore they saw her. The Carmichael family wanted justice, wanted compensation, wanted her gone from this town where she had lived her entire 22 years. Her father had died 2 winters ago, her mother the year before that, and she had no one to stand up for her, no one to vouch for her character beyond her own trembling voice. "You got some nerve showing your face here," came a gruff voice behind her, and Clara turned to see Bill Carmichael himself, the ranch foreman, his weathered face twisted with anger. "That barn was worth more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes, girl. Mr. Carmichael Sr. is talking to the sheriff about pressing charges. You best get your affairs in order." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I did not start that fire, Mr. Carmichael. I was not even near the barn that day. I was home tending my garden." "Those witnesses are mistaken. 3 people do not mistake what they saw," Bill shot back. "You were carrying a lantern, acting strange, and an hour later the whole thing went up like kindling. The evidence speaks for itself." "What evidence?" Clara demanded, her voice rising despite her fear. "Where is this lantern I supposedly carried? Where is any proof beyond people thinking they saw something?" Bill leaned in close, his breath reeking of whiskey. "In these parts, when decent folks say they saw something, that is all the proof we need. You will pay for what you did one way or another." He shouldered past her, nearly knocking her into the hitching post, and Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She would not cry here, would not give them the satisfaction, but the injustice of it burned worse than any fire. She had not done this thing, but in a town like Redemption Springs, the truth mattered less than what people believed, and they believed she was guilty. She gathered her skirts and hurried toward home, a small cabin 2 miles outside town that her father had built with his own hands. The walk gave her time to think, time to feel the panic rising in her chest like flood water. If the sheriff arrested her, if they took her to trial, she would have no money for a lawyer, no way to defend herself. She could hang for this, or at the very least spend years in prison. The thought made her stomach twist. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she walked the dusty road, heat shimmering off the hard-packed earth. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and promising, but they had been gathering for weeks without delivering rain. The whole territory was desperate for water, for relief from this endless summer heat that made tempers short and judgment quick. Clara was so lost in her desperate thoughts that she almost did not notice the rider approaching from the opposite direction, until his horse was nearly upon her. She stepped aside quickly, expecting him to pass without acknowledgement like most folks did these days, but instead the rider pulled up short, his bay gelding dancing sideways. "Miss Bennett." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and measured, and Clara looked up to see a man she had never seen before. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall in the saddle, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer sky. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, his hat battered from use, his boots scuffed, but there was something different about him, something in the way he sat his horse and looked at her without that now-familiar contempt. "I am Clara Bennett," she said cautiously. "Do I know you?" "Name is James Mitchell," he said, swinging down from his horse with easy grace. "I have been working at the Carmichael ranch for about a week now, hired on as a horsebreaker. I heard about what happened with the barn, heard your name mentioned more than once." Clara's defenses went up immediately. "If you have come to add your accusations to everyone else's, you can save your breath. I have heard enough for one lifetime." But James shook his head, something thoughtful in his expression. "Actually, I came looking for you because something does not add up about that whole situation. I have been asking questions, and the more I learn, the less sense it makes." Hope flickered in Clara's chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. "What do you mean?" James glanced back toward town, then seemed to make a decision. "Can we talk somewhere more private? I do not think you want this conversation happening on the open road where anyone might pass by." Clara knew she should be cautious, should not invite a strange man to her home, but desperation made her bold. Besides, what did she have to lose at this point? "My cabin is just ahead. We can talk there." They walked together, James leading his horse, and Clara was acutely aware of his presence beside her. He moved like someone comfortable in his own skin, confident but not arrogant, and when he glanced at her, there was none of the judgment she had grown accustomed to seeing in people's eyes. Her cabin was small but tidy, the garden her mother had planted still producing vegetables despite Clara's grief-stricken neglect of it. She gestured to the pair of chairs on the narrow porch, and they sat while James's horse cropped at the sparse grass nearby. "Tell me what happened that day," James said without preamble. "The day of the fire, tell me everything you remember." Clara took a breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "It was 3 days ago in the afternoon. I was here all day, working in the garden, mending some clothes. I never left the property. The first I knew of any fire was when I saw the smoke rising from the direction of the Carmichael ranch and heard the church bell ringing the alarm. I ran toward it like everyone else, wanting to help, but by the time I arrived, the barn was already gone. Just smoking ruins. And you did not have a lantern with you that day." "No," Clara said emphatically. "Why would I? It was full daylight. I have no reason to carry a lantern around in the middle of the afternoon, and I certainly had no reason to be anywhere near the Carmichael ranch. I have been avoiding that place since Bill Carmichael made unwanted advances toward me last spring and I rejected him." James's expression darkened. "Did you tell anyone about that?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Who would I tell? Bill Carmichael is the foreman of the biggest ranch around here. I am nobody, an orphan with no family and no influence. My word against his would not amount to much." "It might amount to more than you think," James said slowly. "Especially if Bill has a grudge against you and a reason to want you blamed for something you did not do." The possibility hung in the air between them, and Clara felt anger mixing with her fear. "You think he is deliberately framing me? But the witnesses, the people who said they saw me near the barn with a lantern, they have no reason to lie for Bill Carmichael. Do they not?" James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I have been watching and listening at the ranch. 2 of those witnesses work for Carmichael. The 3rd owes him money. I found that out in just a few days of casual conversation. Makes a man wonder what else might not be quite what it seems." Clara's heart began to pound. "But even if we could prove they are lying, even if we could show Bill has a grudge against me, that does not explain what really caused the fire. Without an alternative explanation, people will still believe I did it." "That is where it gets interesting," James said, and now there was excitement in his voice. "I have been out to the burn site every day since I arrived, looking at what is left of the barn. I grew up on a ranch in Colorado, saw my share of fires, and I know the difference between a fire started by human carelessness and one started by nature." "Nature," Clara breathed. "There was a storm that afternoon," James continued. "Not much of one, barely any rain reached the ground, but there was lightning. I remember because I was in the breaking pen with a young stallion and he spooked at the thunder. That was maybe 20 minutes before someone noticed the smoke. Clara tried to remember, had there been a storm? She had been so focused on her work, on trying to keep her mind off her troubles, that she might not have noticed. But lightning strikes happen all the time. How does that prove anything? Because I found evidence at the barn site, James said, his voice intense now. The burn pattern, the way the fire spread where it started. It all points to a lightning strike on the barn roof, right at the highest point. There is even a scorch mark on what is left of the main beam that shows the path the electricity took. I have seen it before. Lightning hits a barn, follows the metal fixtures, and hay becomes tinder, and the whole thing goes up in minutes. Clara felt dizzy with the implications. You can prove this? You have actual evidence? I believe so, James said, but I am just a drifter cowboy who has been here a week. My word alone will not be enough to clear your name. We need someone with authority to look at the evidence, someone who knows about these things and who cannot be influenced by the Carmichael family. The sheriff works closely with the Carmichaels, Clara said, defeat creeping back into her voice. He will not listen. Then we need to go over his head, James said firmly. There is a U.S. Marshal who makes rounds through this territory. I heard talk that he is due in Redemption Springs within the next few days. If we can get him to examine the evidence before weather or people disturb the site any further, we might have a chance. Clara looked at this stranger who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had been too frightened to voice. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You have no reason to help me. James was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes steady on hers. My sister was falsely accused of something once back in Colorado. Town turned on her just like this, ready to condemn her without real proof. By the time the truth came out, the damage was done. She ended up leaving, going east to live with relatives, her reputation destroyed. I was too young then to help her, barely 16, but I swore I would never stand by and watch an injustice happen again if I could do something about it. The pain in his voice was real, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. I am sorry about your sister. So am I, James said, but maybe I can make it right by helping you if you will let me. Clara found herself nodding, found herself believing for the first time in days that there might be a way out of this nightmare. What do we do? First, we preserve the evidence, James said, standing. I will go back to the barn site tonight, make detailed notes about what I found. Maybe even bring back a piece of that burned beam if I can manage it without being seen. Then we wait for the marshal to arrive and convince him to investigate properly before the Carmichaels can pressure the sheriff into arresting you. That could be days, Clara said, worry gnawing at her. What if they come for me before then? James's jaw set in a determined line. Then I will speak up. I will tell everyone what I found. It might not be enough on its own, but it will make people think twice. And if necessary, I will help you get out of town until the marshal arrives. You would do that. Risk your job, your standing for someone you just met. I would do that for what is right, James said simply. And from what I can see, Miss Bennett, you have been wronged. I aim to help set it right. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Clara felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in a long time. Not just hope, but something warmer, something that had to do with the way James looked at her, with the strength in his voice and the kindness in his eyes. Call me Clara, she said softly. If we are going to be working together to clear my name, we might as well not be so formal. James smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost beautiful. Clara it is, and you should call me James. He left as twilight settled over the land, promising to return the next day with news of what he found at the burn site. Clara watched him ride away, then went inside her cabin and, for the first time since the fire, allowed herself to cry. But these tears were different from the hopeless ones she had shed before. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the overwhelming feeling that she was no longer alone. That night, Clara barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities. What if James really could prove the lightning strike? What if the marshal believed him? What if she could clear her name and return to her life without this shadow hanging over her? And underneath all those thoughts was another, quieter one that she barely acknowledged to herself. What if James was not just helping her out of principle? What if there was something else in the way he looked at her, something that made her heart beat faster? She told herself not to be foolish. He was helping her because it was the right thing to do, nothing more. She could not afford to read anything else into it, could not afford to feel things that might not be returned. But alone in the darkness, with the memory of his steady blue eyes and kind voice, she allowed herself to wonder. James returned the next morning as promised, riding up to her cabin just after dawn. Clara had been awake for hours, had made coffee that she barely touched, had tried to work in her garden but found herself watching the road instead. "I went to the barn site last night after everyone was asleep," James said without preamble, accepting the coffee she offered him. "I have pages of notes about the burn patterns, about the scorch marks on the beams, about where the fire started and how it spread. It all confirms what I thought. This was a lightning strike, no question in my mind." "Did anyone see you?" Clara asked. "No," I was careful, "but Clara, there is more. I found something that worries me. Fresh boot prints near the site, like someone has been going out there recently, and some of the debris has been moved. I think someone might be trying to disturb the evidence." Clara's brief hope faltered. "Bill Carmichael, does he know what really happened? Is he trying to hide the truth?" "I do not know," James admitted, "but it makes getting the marshal out there even more urgent. I rode into town before coming here, asked around about when he is expected. Word is he should arrive tomorrow afternoon. I plan to approach him as soon as he gets to town." "The Carmichaels will try to stop you," Clara said. "If Bill has been covering up the truth, he will not want the marshal poking around." "Let him try," James said, and there was steel in his voice. "I am not afraid of Bill Carmichael or anyone else. The truth is the truth, and it needs to come out." They spent the morning going over James's notes, and Clara was impressed by the thoroughness of his observations. He had documented everything with the precision of someone who knew what he was doing, and his sketches of the burn site clearly showed the pattern he was describing. "You should have been an investigator," Clara said, looking through the pages. "This is remarkable work." James shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the compliment. "I just pay attention. My father taught me to look at things carefully, to not accept the easy explanation if the evidence points elsewhere. He was a rancher, but he could have been a scientist the way he approached problems." "He sounds like a good man." "He was," James said, and the past tense told her another story, one of loss similar to her own. "He died 4 years ago. Pneumonia took him in the winter. My mother followed within 6 months. Broken heart, the doctor said, though he called it something fancier." "I lost both my parents too," Clara said quietly. "My mother to fever, my father to a kick from a horse. I understand how it feels to be alone." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared grief and shared determination. James reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, placed his hand over hers. The touch was warm, solid, real, and Clara felt it all the way through her body. "You are not alone anymore," James said, his voice low. "Whatever happens, you have someone standing with you now." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust this feeling blooming in her chest, but fear held her back. "You barely know me. What if you are wrong about me? What if I am not the person you think I am?" "Are you saying you did start the fire?" James asked, a hint of humor in his voice. "No, of course not." "Then I am not wrong about you. I have good instincts about people, Clara. I knew the moment I heard the story that something was wrong, and when I saw you yesterday, when I looked in your eyes, I knew for certain you were telling the truth. I trust that feeling." "I am glad one of us does," Clara said, but she left her hand where it was, taking comfort from his touch. The moment was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders from the sound of it, and James was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Clara's heart sank when she saw his expression. "It is Bill Carmichael and 3 other men from the ranch," he said grimly. They are coming here. Clara stood, her legs unsteady. They are coming to arrest me. They are not going to wait for the sheriff. Over my dead body, James said, and moved toward the door. Clara grabbed his arm. You cannot fight them all. There are 4 of them and one of you. Please do not get hurt on my account. I am not going to let them take you, James said firmly, but he did not reach for his gun, and Clara was grateful for that. Stay behind me. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch as the riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Bill Carmichael dismounted, his face flushed with anger or exertion or both. Mitchell, I should have known I would find you here, Bill growled. You have been snooping around, asking questions, making a nuisance of yourself. Mr. Carmichael is not pleased. I do not much care what Mr. Carmichael is pleased about, James said evenly. I care about the truth, and the truth is that Clara Bennett did not start that fire. You calling me a liar? Bill took a step forward, his hand moving toward his gun. I am saying you are wrong, James corrected, and I have evidence to prove it. That barn was struck by lightning. I found the scorch marks, documented the burn pattern, everything that proves it was an act of nature, not arson. Bill's face twisted. That is nonsense. There was barely any storm that day. There was enough, James said. Lightning does not need a big storm to strike, and I will be presenting my findings to the U.S. Marshal when he arrives tomorrow. He can examine the evidence himself and make his own conclusions. The other 3 ranch hands had dismounted now, spreading out in a way that made Clara's stomach clench. These were not men who had come to talk. The marshal does not need to be bothered with this, Bill said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. We know who is responsible. The girl needs to come with us now, face justice for what she did. She is not going anywhere, James said, and his voice was hard as stone. Not until the marshal has investigated properly. If you try to take her by force, you will have to go through me, and that will make this a kidnapping, which is a federal crime. I do not think Mr. Carmichael wants that kind of attention on his ranch. Bill's hand was on his gun now, and Clara could see the calculation in his eyes. He wanted to push this, wanted to take her, but James's words had given him pause. The other men were looking uncertain too, shifting their weight, glancing at each other. You are making a big mistake, Mitchell, Bill said finally. You are throwing away a good job for a girl you do not even know, a girl who is guilty as sin. If I am making a mistake, it is mine to make, James said. Now I suggest you and your men get back on your horses and ride out. You can take your concerns to the sheriff, let him handle it proper-like. But you are not taking Clara anywhere today. For a long moment, Clara thought it was going to turn violent. She could see Bill's jaw working, see the anger in every line of his body. But finally, he spat in the dirt and turned back to his horse. You will regret this, he said, swinging into the saddle. Both of you will regret this. They rode away hard, dust billowing behind them, and James stayed on the porch until they were out of sight. Then he let out a long breath and turned to Clara, who was shaking. Are you all right? He asked. I cannot believe you did that, Clara said, her voice unsteady. You stood up to 4 armed men for me. You could have been killed. But I was not, James pointed out. Bill is a bully, but he is not stupid. He knows that harming me or taking you by force would bring down more trouble than it is worth, but Clara, we need to be prepared. He is going to go to the sheriff now, going to push for your arrest. We might not have until tomorrow. Then what do we do? James thought for a moment. We go into town ourselves right now. We talk to the sheriff, present my findings, insist that the marshal investigate before any arrest is made. It is risky, but it is better than waiting for them to come for you. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to hide, but she knew he was right. Running would make her look guilty. Hiding would accomplish nothing. If they were going to do this, they needed to do it head-on. All right, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Let me change into my better dress. If I am going to face the whole town, I might as well look presentable. 20 minutes later, they were riding toward Redemption Springs together, Clara on her old mare and James on his bay gelding. Clara had not ridden into town with her head held high in days, but with James beside her, she found the courage to do so. She could feel eyes on them as they rode down the main street, could hear the whispers starting, but she kept her gaze forward. The sheriff's office was a small building near the center of town, and they tied their horses outside. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw was a man in his 50s, gray-haired and weathered, who had kept the peace in Redemption Springs for more than a decade. He looked up in surprise when they walked in. "Miss Bennett," he said slowly, "I was just about to send someone for you. Bill Carmichael was here not 20 minutes ago, insisting I arrest you immediately." "On what charges?" James asked before Clara could speak. "What actual evidence do you have against her, Sheriff?" Bradshaw turned his attention to James. "You are the new hand at the Carmichael ranch." "Mitchell, is it? James Mitchell. And I am here to present evidence that Miss Bennett is innocent, that the fire was caused by a lightning strike, not arson." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That is quite a claim. You got proof?" James laid his notes and sketches on the sheriff's desk. "I documented everything at the barn site. The burn pattern, the scorch marks on the main beam, the point of origin. It all points to lightning. I have seen it before, Sheriff. I know what it looks like. And I know for a fact there was lightning that afternoon, right around the time the fire started." Bradshaw examined the papers, his expression skeptical at first but growing more interested as he read. "This is pretty detailed work. You know what you are doing. I grew up on a ranch. I have seen fires before, both natural and man-made. I know the difference." "The witnesses said they saw Miss Bennett near the barn with a lantern," Bradshaw pointed out. "The witnesses work for Bill Carmichael or owe him money," James countered. "I checked, and Miss Bennett says she was not near the barn that day, had no reason to be there." "Without physical evidence of arson, without the supposed lantern she was carrying, what you have is just accusations from people who might have reason to lie." Bradshaw leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the desk. "You are asking me to go against the biggest rancher in the county on the word of a drifter cowboy I have known for all of a week." "I am asking you to do your job," James said, but his voice was respectful. "Wait for the marshal to arrive. Let him investigate before you make any arrests. If I am wrong, if the evidence does not support what I am saying, then arrest Miss Bennett with my blessing. But if I am right, you will be preventing a terrible injustice." The sheriff looked at Clara, really looked at her for the first time. "Did you start that fire, Miss Bennett? Truth now." "No, sir," Clara said firmly. "I did not. I was home all day. I had no reason to be near that barn and no reason to harm the Carmichael family, despite what Bill Carmichael might say about me." "What does Bill say about you?" Clara hesitated, then decided she had nothing to lose. "That I am a troublemaker, that I am not to be trusted. The truth is that he made unwanted advances toward me last spring and I rejected him. I believe he holds a grudge for that." Bradshaw's expression shifted. "Did you report these advances?" "Who would I report them to?" Clara asked. "He is the foreman of the biggest ranch around. I am nobody. I kept quiet and tried to stay out of his way." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "The marshal is due tomorrow afternoon. I will hold off on any arrest until he can review the situation." "But Miss Bennett, you need to stay close to home. Do not leave the area. And Mitchell, if you are wrong about this, if you are playing me for a fool, I will see you charged as an accessory." "I am not wrong," James said confidently. "Thank you for giving us this chance, Sheriff." As they left the office, Clara felt weak with relief. They had bought themselves time, a day at least. But as they untied their horses, she saw the gathered crowd across the street. Word had spread fast that she was at the sheriff's office, and people had come to watch, to judge, to condemn. "Murderess!" someone shouted, and Clara flinched. "She should hang." Another voice called. James stepped close to her, his presence solid and protective. "Ignore them. They will sing a different tune once the truth comes out." But as they rode out of town, Clara could feel the hatred following them like a physical force. She had lived in Redemption Springs her entire life, had been born here, had known most of these people since childhood. And now they wanted her dead. The injustice of it, the cruelty, made her chest ache. They rode in silence back to her cabin, and when they arrived, James helped her down from her horse. His hands on her waist were gentle, and he did not let go immediately. "You were very brave back there," he said quietly. "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You looked that sheriff in the eye and told your truth. That takes courage." Clara found herself looking up at him, at the strong lines of his face, the kindness in his eyes that never wavered. They were standing very close, and she could feel the warmth of him, smell the scent of leather and horses and something uniquely him. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For believing me when no one else would. For standing up for me. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," James said, and one of his hands came up to gently touch her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Clara, I need to tell you something. I know this is not the right time, I know you have enough to worry about, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What is it?" "From the moment I saw you, from the moment I heard your story and looked into your eyes, something happened to me. I cannot explain it, cannot put it into proper words, but it is like I have been waiting my whole life to find you. I know it sounds foolish, I know it is too soon, but Clara, I am falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop, the air between them charged with possibility. Clara knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, should not let herself feel this way about a man she had known for barely 2 days. But the heart did not listen to logic, and hers was already answering his declaration with its own racing rhythm. "It does not sound foolish," she said, her voice barely audible. "It sounds like exactly what I have been feeling too and was too afraid to admit." James's smile was like sunrise, and then he was leaning down, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper, more certain. Clara's hands came up to grip his shirt, holding him close, and his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Clara Bennett, I am going to clear your name. And then, if you will have me, I am going to court you properly, the way you deserve. I am going to stay in this town and build a life here with you." "That is a big promise," Clara said, but she was smiling through the tears on her cheeks. "What if the marshal does not believe you? What if I still end up arrested?" "Then I will find another way to prove your innocence," James said fiercely. "I will move heaven and earth if I have to. I am not losing you, Clara, not now that I have found you." They went inside the cabin, and James insisted on staying to make sure no one else came looking for trouble. They spent the afternoon talking, learning about each other, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Clara told him about her parents, about her loneliness since their deaths, about her dreams of one day having a family of her own. James talked about his childhood in Colorado, about his sister and his parents, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never feeling like he belonged anywhere until now. "I think I was meant to end up here," he said as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "I think I was meant to find you, to help you. It feels like destiny." "I never believed in destiny before," Clara admitted, "but maybe you are right. Maybe we were meant to find each other." That night, James made a bedroll on the porch, refusing to leave Clara alone and unprotected, but also respecting her reputation by not staying inside. Clara lay awake in her small bed, listening to the sounds of the night, thinking about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she had been alone and terrified, facing ruin and possibly death. Now she had hope, had help, had someone who believed in her. And more than that, she had love, new and fragile and precious. The next day dawned clear and hot, and the tension in the air was palpable as they rode back into Redemption Springs together. The marshal was due in the afternoon, and James wanted to intercept him before the Carmichaels or anyone else could poison his mind against Clara. They waited at the saloon, which was the marshal's usual first stop when he came through town. Clara drew stares and whispers, but with James beside her, she held her head high. The barkeep served them coffee without comment, though his expression was disapproving. The marshal arrived just after 2 o'clock, a big man in his 40s with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Marshal William Tucker was known throughout the territory as a fair man but a hard one, someone who did not tolerate nonsense from either side of the law. James approached him directly. "Marshal Tucker, my name is James Mitchell. I need to talk to you about a fire that happened here a few days ago and a woman who is being falsely accused of starting it." Tucker looked him over, then looked at Clara. "You are the Bennett woman." "Yes, sir," Clara said steadily. "I heard about this situation. The Carmichaels sent word ahead that they wanted me to handle your arrest personally, make sure it was done proper. They say you burned down their barn, killed 2 horses. The horses lived," James interjected. "And she did not start the fire. It was lightning, and I have proof." Tucker's eyebrows rose. "Proof? That is a bold claim. Let me see it." They moved to a table and James spread out his notes and sketches. Tucker examined everything carefully, asking questions, challenging James's conclusions, but James had answers for everything. Clara could see the marshal's expression changing, see him taking James seriously. "This is thorough work," Tucker said finally. "You have experience with this kind of investigation. I grew up on a ranch, saw my share of fires. I know what lightning damage looks like. And Marshal, if you go out to the barn site yourself, you can see what I am talking about. The evidence is still there. The witnesses say they saw Miss Bennett near the barn with a lantern," Tucker pointed out. "The witnesses work for the man who has a grudge against Miss Bennett," James countered. "Bill Carmichael, the foreman, he made unwanted advances toward her, she rejected him, and now he wants revenge. At least 2 of the witnesses work directly under him, and the 3rd owes him money. Their testimony is compromised." Tucker looked at Clara. "Is this true about Carmichael making advances?" "Yes, sir," Clara said quietly. "Last spring, I told him I was not interested and he did not take it well." The marshal was quiet, his fingers tapping on the table. Finally, he stood. "All right. I am going out to the barn site right now. Miss Bennett, you are to stay here in town where I can find you. Mitchell, you are coming with me to show me what you found. Sheriff Bradshaw, you are coming too." The sheriff, who had been standing nearby listening, nodded. Clara felt her stomach clench with anxiety as James squeezed her hand briefly before following the marshal out. She was left alone in the saloon with dozens of hostile eyes on her, and she had never felt more vulnerable. The hours that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She sat at that table, nursing a cup of coffee that went cold, and waited. People came and went, some glaring at her, others whispering, but no one spoke to her directly. She felt like an animal on display, judged and found guilty by a jury of her peers. It was nearly sunset when the marshal finally returned with James and the sheriff. Clara stood immediately, her heart in her throat, trying to read their expressions. The marshal's face was unreadable, but James was smiling, and that gave her hope. "Miss Bennett," Marshal Tucker said formally, and the saloon went quiet, everyone leaning in to hear. "After examining the evidence at the barn site and reviewing the testimony, I have concluded that you are innocent of any wrongdoing. The fire was caused by a lightning strike, just as Mr. Mitchell claimed. The physical evidence is clear and irrefutable." Clara's knees went weak and she grabbed the table for support. "I am free." "You are free," Tucker confirmed. "There will be no charges filed. Furthermore, I will be having words with Bill Carmichael and the witnesses who gave false testimony. Making false accusations is a serious matter, and there will be consequences." The saloon erupted in murmurs, some angry, some surprised, some relieved. Clara could barely hear them over the roaring in her ears. She was free. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. James was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist to steady her. "I told you," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "I told you we would prove it." "How can I ever thank you?" Clara asked, tears streaming down her face now. "You saved my life." "You can thank me by letting me take you home," James said. "And then, if you are willing, you can thank me by allowing me to court you properly the way I promised." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes to all of it. They rode back to her cabin together in the fading light, and this time the whispers that followed them were different. Clara could feel the shift, could feel the town's opinion changing as word spread of the marshal's findings. She was no longer the villain in this story. She was the victim, falsely accused, and James was the hero who had saved her. But to Clara, James was so much more than a hero. He was the man who had believed in her when no one else would, who had fought for her, who had looked at her with kindness and respect and love. He was her future if she was brave enough to claim it. At the cabin, James helped her down from her horse, and this time when he held her, there was no hesitation. He kissed her like a man who had earned the right, deep and passionate and full of promise. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, with all the fear and relief and love bursting inside her. "Stay," she whispered when they finally broke apart. "Not on the porch this time, stay with me." "Clara, I do not want to ruin your reputation," James said, though his eyes were dark with want. "The town is already talking." "Let them talk," Clara said fiercely. "I almost lost everything, almost lost my life for something I did not do. I am not wasting any more time worrying about what people think. I know what I want. I want you, James Mitchell. I want a life with you. And I do not want to spend another night alone." James looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. Whatever he saw there satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "Then I will stay. But Clara, I want to do this right. Tomorrow I am going into town and talking to the preacher. I want to marry you, proper and legal. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "Tomorrow then," Clara agreed. "But tonight, just hold me. I need to know this is real, that I am safe, that you are here." They went inside together, and James built up the fire while Clara made them a simple supper. They ate and talked and held hands across the table, and when darkness fell completely, James pulled her close on the small bed and wrapped his arms around her. They lay together, fully clothed but intimately entwined, and Clara felt safer than she had in months, maybe years. "Tell me about Colorado," she said softly. "Tell me about your home." James's voice rumbled in his chest, soothing and warm. "It is beautiful country, mountains that touch the sky, valleys so green they hurt your eyes. Cold in the winter, snow so deep you cannot see the fences. My father's ranch was small but prosperous. He raised horses, the finest in 3 counties. I learned everything from him, how to gentle a wild horse, how to read weather, how to work with my hands." "Do you miss it?" "Sometimes," James admitted. "But home is not always a place, sometimes it is a person, and Clara, you feel like home to me." She turned in his arms to face him, their noses nearly touching in the dimness. "You feel like home to me too. Like the part of me that was missing, that I did not even know I was looking for." They kissed again, slow and sweet, and then James tucked her head under his chin and held her while she drifted off to sleep. For the first time in days, Clara slept deeply, without nightmares, without fear. The next morning, James was true to his word. After breakfast, he rode into town to speak with Reverend Harrison about performing a marriage ceremony. Clara spent the morning cleaning her cabin, tending her garden, doing normal, everyday tasks that felt miraculous after everything that had happened. She was free, she was safe, and she was loved. It felt like a dream. James returned in the early afternoon with news. "The Reverend will marry us tomorrow afternoon if that suits you." He was surprised by the haste, but when I explained everything that happened, he understood. He said any man who would fight so hard to save a woman's life and reputation deserves to claim her as his wife without delay. "Tomorrow," Clara breathed. "That is so soon." "Too soon?" James asked, worry creeping into his expression. "I can wait if you need more time, Clara." "I do not want to rush you." "No," Clara said quickly. "It is not too soon. I want to marry you, James. I want to start our life together. I am just overwhelmed by how much my life has changed in a few days." "Mine too," James said, pulling her close. "A week ago, I was just a drifter looking for work. Now I have found purpose, found home, found love. It is like waking up from a long sleep." They spent the rest of the day making plans. James would continue working at the Carmichael ranch until he could find other employment, though he suspected that might not last long given the tension with Bill. Clara had a small amount of money her parents had left her, and the cabin was paid for, so they would not starve. It would be tight for a while, but they would manage. That evening there was a knock on the door and Clara tensed, old fears rising. But it was Sheriff Bradshaw, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Mitchell," he said formally. "I wanted to come by and apologize. I should have investigated more thoroughly from the start, should not have been so quick to accept the accusations against you. I failed in my duty and I am sorry for that." Clara was shocked. An apology was the last thing she had expected. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means a great deal. I also wanted you to know that Marshal Tucker had a long talk with Bill Carmichael and the witnesses who lied. Carmichael has been removed from his position as foreman, and the witnesses are facing charges for false testimony. The Marshal does not take kindly to people who abuse the law for personal vendettas." "Good," James said firmly. "Bill Carmichael deserves to face consequences for what he tried to do." "He does," Bradshaw agreed. "And Miss Bennett, I want you to know that you are welcome in this town. I will be making sure everyone knows you were cleared, that you are innocent. You should not have to live under a cloud of suspicion." After the sheriff left, Clara and James looked at each other in wonder. Justice, real justice, was being served. The people who had wronged her were facing consequences. It felt almost too good to be true. The next day, Clara dressed in her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk. It was simple but beautiful, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. She fixed her hair as best she could without a mirror, and when James arrived to escort her to the church, the look on his face told her she looked fine. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The church was small, and Clara had not expected many people to attend given everything that had happened. But when they walked through the doors, she was shocked to find the pews half full. Sheriff Bradshaw was there with his wife, the proprietor of the general store, and his family, old Mrs. Henderson, who had crossed the street to avoid Clara just days ago. Ranchers and their wives, townspeople she had known her whole life. They had come to witness her marriage, to show their support, to make amends for how they had treated her. Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she walked down the aisle on James's arm, and he squeezed her hand gently. Reverend Harrison performed the ceremony with warmth and gravity, speaking of love and faith, of standing by one another through trials and tribulations. When it came time for the vows, James spoke as clearly and firmly, his blue eyes locked on Clara's. "I, James Mitchell, take you, Clara Bennett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by you all the days of my life. I will be your shelter in storms, your comfort in sorrow, your partner in joy. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Clara's voice trembled but did not break as she spoke her own vows. "I, Clara Bennett, take you, James Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand by you all the days of my life. I will be your haven, your strength, your companion on this journey. This I vow before God and these witnesses." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and when James kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause. Clara laughed against his lips, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. She was married, she was free, she was loved. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The people of Redemption Springs held a small reception in the church hall, and Clara was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. People apologized for doubting her, offered congratulations, brought gifts they could ill afford. It was their way of making amends, and Clara accepted graciously, though part of her would always remember who had stood by her and who had not. As the sun began to set, James and Clara finally escaped the well-wishers and rode back to the cabin together, now husband and wife. The evening was warm, the air finally holding a hint of moisture that promised rain soon. The drought might be breaking, Clara thought, and it felt symbolic somehow. At the cabin, James swept her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh. "I believe this is traditional," he said with a grin. "I believe you are right, husband," Clara said, and the word felt wonderful on her tongue. He set her down gently inside, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy despite everything they had been through together. This was their wedding night, the beginning of their life as man and wife, and the weight of it hung between them. "Clara," James said softly, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. "I know this has all happened so fast. If you need time, if you want to wait, I will understand. There is no rush." Clara placed her hands over his, holding them against her cheeks. "I have waited long enough, James. I have spent too much of my life alone, afraid, uncertain. I do not want to wait anymore. I want to be your wife in every way. I want to start our life together tonight." His eyes darkened with love and desire, and he leaned down to kiss her, slow and deep. Clara kissed him back, her hands moving to the buttons of his shirt, fumbling slightly in her nervousness and eagerness. James helped her, shrugging out of his shirt, and then his hands were at the buttons of her dress, his fingers deft despite the tremor in them. They undressed each other slowly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with wonder and care. When they finally came together in the narrow bed, it was with tenderness and passion, with whispered words of love and gasps of pleasure. Clara had never been with a man before, and there was pain at first, but James was gentle, patient, murmuring reassurances until the pain faded, and there was only sensation, only connection, only the two of them moving together in the oldest dance of all. Afterward they lay tangled together, slick with sweat despite the cooling night air, and Clara had never felt more complete. James held her close, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you," he said simply. "More than I ever thought I could love another person." "I love you too," Clara whispered back. "You saved me, James, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," he said. "I was drifting, lost, looking for something I could not name, and then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future, dreaming together. James wanted to start his own horse breeding operation, using the skills his father had taught him. Clara wanted a family, children to fill the cabin with laughter and noise. They would work hard, save money, build something together. In the weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. James did leave the Carmichael ranch as they had suspected he would, but he quickly found work at a smaller spread where the owner appreciated his skill with horses. The pay was decent, and the work was satisfying. Clara continued tending her garden, selling produce in town to bring in extra money. The town's attitude toward Clara had shifted completely. People went out of their way to greet her now, to include her in social gatherings, to make up for their previous treatment. Clara tried not to be bitter about how quickly they had turned on her and then back again, but it was a lesson she would not forget. In difficult times, you discovered who your true friends were. Bill Carmichael left Redemption Springs not long after the scandal, unable to face the shame of what he had done. The witnesses who had lied faced fines and community service, and everyone knew why. It was a measure of justice, though Clara knew no punishment could fully make up for the terror they had put her through, but she tried not to dwell on the past. She had James now, had a future to look forward to, and that was what mattered. He was true to his word in every way, loving and supportive, working hard to build a life for them. They saved every penny they could, planning for the day when they could buy some land of their own, start that horse breeding operation James dreamed of. 6 months after their wedding, Clara realized she was with child. She told James over supper one evening, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then the fork clattered to the plate, and he was around the table in 2 strides, pulling her up into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are having a baby, we are having a baby," Clara confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy? happy. James set her down carefully like she was made of glass, his hands framing her face. Clara, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to be parents. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, could barely keep food down, and James worried constantly. But the doctor assured them this was normal, that Clara was healthy and strong, and gradually the sickness passed. Clara's belly began to swell, and James treated her like precious china, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. I am not fragile, Clara protested one evening when he insisted on carrying water from the well. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can manage household chores. I know you can, James said, setting down the water bucket and pulling her gently into his arms, but I want to take care of you. Let me do this, Clara. Let me make things easier for you while you are growing our child. How could she argue with that? She let him fuss over her, let him do the heavy work, and spent her energy preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, prepared the small room off the main cabin that would serve as a nursery, and tried not to let her fears overwhelm her. Her own mother had died when Clara was young, and she had no female relatives to guide her through this. But the women of Redemption Springs, perhaps still trying to make amends for their previous treatment, rallied around her. They brought gifts, shared advice, promised to be there when her time came. The baby arrived on a cold January night in 1883, after hours of labor that left Clara exhausted and James white-faced with worry. But when the doctor finally placed their son in Clara's arms, all the pain and fear evaporated. He was perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like his father and eyes that would eventually turn the same blue. They named him Thomas, after James's father, and James cried when Clara told him. He is beautiful, James whispered, touching his son's tiny hand with one finger, marveling when the baby's fist closed around it. He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this gift. We made him together, Clara said, feeling a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. He is ours. Parenthood changed them in ways they could not have anticipated. James became even more determined to provide for his family, working long hours and saving every penny. Clara discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and happy, and watching James with their son made Clara fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He was a devoted father, coming home exhausted from work, but always finding energy to hold Thomas, to sing to him, to help Clara with the endless tasks that came with a new baby. When Thomas was 6 months old, James came home one evening with news. The Morrison Ranch is selling a parcel of land, 50 acres with a good water source. It is perfect for what we have been planning, Clara, and I have been saving. We have almost enough for a down payment. Clara's heart leaped. Are you serious? We can really do this. We can really do this, James confirmed, his grin wide. It will be hard work building from nothing. We will need to construct a house, fencing, stables. It will take years. But it will be ours, Clara, our land, our dream. They bought the land in the spring of 1883, and James immediately began working every spare moment to improve it. He built a small house first, nothing fancy but solid and weatherproof, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. They moved in when Thomas was 8 months old, and Clara cried as she walked through the door of her own home on her own land, with her husband and son beside her. James started small with the horse breeding, buying 2 mares and a stallion with good bloodlines. He gentled wild horses captured from the range and sold them for profit. Slowly, painstakingly, he built a reputation for quality animals and fair dealing. Clara helped where she could, managing the household, caring for Thomas, keeping their accounts. 3 years later, they had their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after James's mother. She had Clara's green eyes and a temperament that was both sweet and stubborn. Thomas adored his little sister, and the ranch rang with the sounds of children's laughter. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened their water supply, illnesses that scared them both. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew stronger with each challenge overcome. James never let Clara forget that she was cherished, that she was his partner in all things. Clara made sure James knew he was appreciated, that his hard work and devotion did not go unnoticed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Clara with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a brand new sign hung over the door. Mitchell Horse Ranch EST, 1883. "We are official now," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood looking at the sign. "A real operation. I could not have done any of this without you, Clara. You are my foundation, my strength." "And you are mine," Clara said, leaning back against his chest. "Do you ever think about how we met, about how close I came to losing everything?" "I think about it sometimes," James admitted. "And I am grateful for the lightning strike that brought me into your life, strange as that sounds." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I am grateful too. For the lightning, for you refusing to let injustice stand, for your courage in speaking up when no one else would. You gave me back my life, James, and then you gave me so much more." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their children playing nearby, their horses grazing in the pasture. It was everything they had dreamed of and worked for, a life built on love and trust and determination. 2 years later, they had their 3rd child, another son they named Michael. The ranch was thriving now, James's reputation drawing buyers from across Texas. They had 12 horses, including several foals that would sell for good prices once they were trained. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. They had hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Daniel who reminded Clara a bit of how James had been when she first met him, earnest and hardworking. Thomas was 7 now, already showing an aptitude for working with horses like his father. Sarah was 4, smart as a whip and fearless. Michael was a chubby, happy baby who rarely cried. Clara looked at her family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for how blessed she was. She thought sometimes about those dark days when she had been accused of arson, when it seemed the whole world had turned against her. She remembered the fear, the desperation, the certainty that her life was over. And then she thought about James riding into her life like something out of a story, believing in her, fighting for her, loving her. "What are you thinking about?" James asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. "You have that faraway look." "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Clara said honestly. "If you had not stopped to talk to me that day, if you had not investigated the fire, if you had not been brave enough to stand up for a stranger." James reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You are not a stranger, you never were. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were important, knew you were going to change my life. I just followed my instincts." "Your instincts were good," Clara said with a smile, "but James, I want you to know something. Even if you had not cleared my name, even if I had gone to prison, meeting you would still have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Because you saw me, really saw me when everyone else just saw someone to blame. You believed in me. That changed everything." "I will always believe in you," James said seriously. "Until my last breath, Clara Mitchell, I will believe in you, stand with you, love you. That is my promise." "And mine to you," Clara said. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars came out one by one. The children eventually tired and came inside, and Clara helped them get ready for bed while James checked on the horses one final time. It was their routine, the rhythm of their days, and Clara treasured it. In bed that night, wrapped in James's arms, Clara thought about how far they had come. From accusation and fear to love and prosperity, from loneliness to family, from despair to hope, it had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," James whispered back, "forever and always." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The children grew and more came, 2 more sons born 2 years apart, bringing their family to 5 children total. The ranch expanded as James's reputation continued to grow. They became pillars of the community in Redemption Springs, respected and admired. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch, as James's back began to protest the hard physical labor. Sarah surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small schoolhouse on the edge of town. Michael showed an aptitude for business, keeping the ranch's accounts with meticulous precision. The younger 2 boys were still finding their way, but Clara had no doubt they would make their parents proud. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The children, some now with families of their own, filled the expanded house with noise and laughter. Grandchildren ran through the rooms, and Clara marveled at how full her life had become. That evening, after the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home or to bed, Clara and James walked out to their favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the ranch. The moon was full, casting silver light over everything, and Clara leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him. 20 years, she said softly. It does not seem possible. Best 20 years of my life, James said, his arm around her shoulders. Though I have to admit, some parts are starting to creak more than they used to, Clara laughed. We are both getting older, but I would not trade a single gray hair or wrinkle if it meant I did not have this life with you. Not even the wrinkles, James teased, but his voice was tender. Not even the wrinkles, Clara confirmed. Every line tells a story, James. Stories of laughter and tears, struggle and triumph, love and family. I am proud of every single one. They stood in silence for a while, looking at the ranch they had built together, the legacy they would leave to their children. Then James turned Clara to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You remember what I told you that first night we met? He asked. When I said I thought I was meant to find you, that it felt like destiny. I remember, Clara said. I was right, James said simply. Every step I took in my life, every decision I made, every road I traveled, it was all leading me to you, to this, to our family, our home, our life together. I would not change a single thing, Clara, not one moment. Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines there, the gray in his beard, the love in his eyes that had never dimmed. Neither would I. You are my great love, James Mitchell, my partner, my friend, my everything. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for loving me. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done, James said, and kissed her under the moonlight. A kiss that held 20 years of devotion and the promise of however many more they would be granted. They walked back to the house hand in hand, passing the barn where that sign still hung. Mitchell Horse Ranch ESD, 1883. Clara paused to look at it, remembering the day James had surprised her with it, remembering all the years of work and love that had gone into building this place. You know, she said thoughtfully, we should add something to that sign, something about how it was founded on truth and justice and love conquering fear. That would be a very long sign, James pointed out with amusement. Then maybe just the love part, Clara said, built on love. That is really what matters. Built on love, James repeated, trying it out. I like that. We will have Daniel make a new sign tomorrow. Inside, the house was quiet, their family settled for the night. Clara and James moved through the familiar rooms, checking on grandchildren who had fallen asleep in various beds, making sure the fire was banked, the doors locked. It was the same routine they had followed for years, comforting in its predictability. In their bedroom, Clara sat at the small vanity while James pulled off his boots, and she found herself thinking once again about that terrifying summer of 1882. About the fire, the accusations, the fear. About a stranger on a bay horse who had stopped to talk to her, who had believed in her, who had changed everything. I was thinking, she said, turning to look at James. Maybe we should tell the story to the grandchildren someday, how we met, what happened. It is an important lesson about standing up for what is right, about not condemning people without evidence. It is also a good love story, James said with a smile. Handsome Cowboy rides to the rescue of a beautiful woman wrongly accused. They fall in love and live happily ever after. Are you saying you are handsome? Clara teased. I am saying you are beautiful, James corrected, coming to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. And that, yes, we should tell the story. Let our grandchildren know that their grandmother was brave enough to stand up for herself, and their grandfather was stubborn enough not to let injustice stand. And that together, we built something that will last long after we are gone, Clara added. Not just the ranch, but a family built on love and truth and standing by each other. They prepared for bed, and Clara found herself, as she often did, thanking whatever force in the universe had brought James into her life. A lightning strike had nearly destroyed her, had been used as a weapon against her, but it had also brought her the greatest gift she could imagine. It had brought her James, and through him, everything else she held dear. As she settled into bed, James pulled her close, and Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was home, she thought, not the cabin or the ranch house or the land, though she loved all those things. Home was this man beside her, these arms around her, this love that had sustained her through everything. James, she murmured, half asleep. If you could go back and change anything about how we met, about what happened, would you? He was quiet for a moment, and she felt his hand stroking through her hair. No, he said finally. Because those difficult times showed me who you really are. They showed your strength, your courage, your integrity. Without them, I might not have seen those things so clearly. And they gave me a chance to prove to you that I was worthy of your trust, of your love. So no, I would not change a thing. Good answer, Clara said with a smile, and let sleep claim her, safe and loved and home. The years marched on, as years do, bringing more changes. They became great-grandparents, marveling at how the family they had started together kept growing and branching out. The ranch passed into Thomas's capable hands, though James still spent time there every day, unable to fully retire from the work he loved. Clara kept busy with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on recipes and stories, making sure the family history was preserved. When they celebrated their 30th anniversary, the whole town of Redemption Springs seemed to turn out for the party. The Mitchell family was beloved now, their story part of local legend. Young people knew about the barn fire and the false accusation, about James's investigation and the truth that had set Clara free. It had become a cautionary tale about rushing to judgment, about the importance of evidence and fairness. But to Clara and James, it was simply their story, the beginning of everything that mattered. They danced together at the anniversary celebration, moving slower now than they once had, but with no less love. Their children and grandchildren watched, many of them wiping away tears at the devotion so clearly visible between the elderly couple. 30 years, and I still feel like the luckiest man alive, James said as they danced. Only 30, Clara teased gently. We have at least another 30 to go if I have anything to say about it. I will take every day I can get, James said seriously. Every moment with you is a blessing, Clara. They lived on for many more years, growing old together with grace and love. When James finally passed away at the age of 78 with Clara holding his hand, his last words were, "I love you." And when Clara followed him 2 years later, surrounded by the huge family they had created together, her last thoughts were of a hot summer day in 1882, of a cowboy on a bay horse, and of lightning that had struck a barn and changed her life forever. At her funeral, the preacher talked about love and faith and legacy. But it was Thomas, their eldest son, who told the real story. He stood before the gathered crowd and spoke of how his parents had met, of the fire and the accusation, of his father's determination to find the truth, and his mother's courage in facing down injustice. They built their marriage on truth, Thomas said, his voice steady despite his grief. On standing up for what was right, on believing in each other even when the world said otherwise. And they built a family on that same foundation. Everything we are, everything we have, started with a lightning strike and a man brave enough to investigate what really happened. Started with love that conquered fear, with truth that defeated lies. That is the legacy they leave us. That is what we should remember. The family laid Clara to rest beside James in the small cemetery overlooking their ranch. The headstone chosen by their children read, "Clara and James Mitchell built on love." And underneath, smaller but no less important, "Truth and courage, love and devotion together forever." Years later, the ranch still operated, now run by great-grandchildren who had never met Clara and James but knew their story by heart. The original barn sign was preserved in the ranch house, a piece of family history. And sometimes, on hot summer afternoons when lightning danced across the Texas sky, the family would gather and tell the story again. The story of she who was blamed for the fire that took the barn, and the cowboy who found proof it was lightning strike. The story of injustice overcome, of truth prevailing, of love that began in the darkest moment and lit the way to a beautiful life together. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. Because in the end, it was not just a story about a fire or an investigation or even about clearing a name. It was a story about love, about choosing to stand up for someone when it would have been easier to look away, about believing in goodness when surrounded by suspicion, about building a life on foundations of trust and devotion and unwavering support. It was the story of Clara and James Mitchell, and it would be told as long as the Mitchell family endured, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the greatest joys, that true love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that standing up for what is right, no matter the cost, is always worth it in the end. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they had instilled, the example they had set, and the love story they had lived. A love story that started with lightning and lasted a lifetime, that overcame false accusations and built something beautiful, that proved love could conquer fear and truth could defeat lies. And in Redemption Springs, Texas, where the Mitchell Horse Ranch still stood proud after all these years, people still spoke of Clara and James with admiration and respect. They spoke of the summer of 1882, of the fire that changed everything, of the cowboy who refused to let an innocent woman be condemned, and of the love that grew from that crucible of injustice. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind that reminded people that goodness exists in the world, that heroes can be found in unexpected places, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last beyond a lifetime. It was a story of the Wild West, of hardship and triumph, of family and legacy. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple. And those are the stories that matter most, the ones that echo through time, inspiring each new generation to believe in the power of love, the importance of truth, and the courage it takes to stand up for what is right. The end of Clara and James Mitchell's time on Earth was not the end of their story, for stories live on, passed from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild, becoming part of the fabric of family history and community legend. Theirs was a story worth telling, and so it was told again and again, a testament to love and truth and the kind of courage that changes everything. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Clara and James were together still, dancing under an eternal moon, grateful for the lightning strike that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through everything. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask?